Go ahead and turn to Colossians chapter 3. Colossians chapter 3. Still interested in this particular context, how singing is brought into this text. And I say that not that there's anything odd about singing, but it would not be what I would have normally would have even guessed would be a part of the context that we're about to deal with. And when we're dealing with the concept of singing and music, we oftentimes think, well, it's a really nice part of the service, and hopefully your music's really good, so your folks are interested and entertained, and some churches now are getting to the point where they're making it a major part, if not the major part of their service, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with incorporating it. It's just, why are they doing it? And then when you read a text like we're in today, it ends up being so far removed from its fundamental purpose, music in our church services, when we gather together. It's so far removed from its fundamental purposes, it just, you realize it's actually a distraction and not pushing what it's actually here for. There is a responsibility that's included in the idea and the concept of music altogether, especially singing, that is far weightier than I think a lot of folks, I think most people would say, well, yeah, our songs ought to be theologically sound, but I like a good tune. Again, there's nothing wrong with that. The problem is we like the tune better than we do the actual words. And then sometimes we'll think, well, it's such a good song that we've always sung it that it doesn't really matter what the words are. And I can remember starting to get to an age where I started to hear about people concerned about certain songs that were sung and what they were referencing. But I'll get to that maybe more later. But it is key, and one of my early memories as a boy was sitting next to my mom's dad. Every once in a long while, he would come to our church. He was not a Baptist by any means, but every once in a while, he would come there, and I would go sit next to him. We called him Pop. And I would sit next to him, and he was not a socialite by any means. He was very quiet. An old Kentucky farmer. It's where he had grown up, and most of my mom's childhood, at least, was there. And he, again, someone who would talk, so I'd sit next to him. But I always remember that when we would sing songs, I could hear him. I couldn't understand a word he was saying. He would try to do the bass. I'm assuming that's what he was trying to do, and I would hear these sounds, and I just thought it was interesting that even he, who was not necessarily someone who would just sing, he'd sing a funny song about us once in a while just to make fun of us as kids. But that was about it that I'd ever heard him sing, but he would sing along with the hymns. And I remember just thinking how significant that was, that he even realized it was important to sing along. I know a lot of folks think that they don't have a good voice, and they might actually be totally right. They might not have a good voice at all. Some of you remember Jake Ackenroad, who used to be here and came to Christ while he was here. And he was real timid about singing because he didn't have a good voice. And I say that with full agreement. I don't know if he was tone deaf or what. Sarah he'd go back and stand back there and sing some of the songs. But one of the things that I know warmed our hearts that we had never heard about when we went down to his funeral was the pastor making note there in the church in Pennsylvania how Jake would just sing out. And they would all smile because he really was not good at carrying a tune. But he would sing out. It was a very small church, even smaller than what we have, and he really wanted to sing out his favorite song, especially "And Can It Be?" And you think, okay, well that's really good. That's really what it ought to be. And I think sometimes we just lose sight of that. It's like, okay, now it's time for our music. But it's more than that. We have a responsibility in it. And so when Matt comes up and directs us in these songs, it's more than just keeping us in line. There's the message behind it. There's a significance of it. Hopefully the tune helps out a bit, but even then it's not totally dependent upon that. And we each then sense the responsibility that's carried or dictated in this particular text. If we look at Colossians chapter 3, getting the context of where we're at, verse 12 on. So as those who have been chosen of God holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving each other whoever has a complaint against anyone. That's again keeping us more than civil. It's keeping us as we ought to be in our relationships with each other. And the motive for this, just as the Lord forgave you, so also should you. And then beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. It's what holds us together. Then, verse 15, let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful, be grateful. This is a command that's going to come up again very quickly here. Let the word of Christ richly dwell within you, with all wisdom. That's an important qualifier there. With all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another. And as I stressed last week when I read it, I think most of us would stop there. Let the word of Christ dwell within you, teaching and admonishing one another. That's exactly what we ought to do. Now let's all set up our scenarios where we're teaching and admonishing one another, which we should do. But there's obviously more to it. Because look at how he says we are to teach and admonish one another. With psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness, that gratefulness, with another qualifier, in your hearts. There's where it's most important to sing. I think that ought to come out of our mouths because that is part of singing. But the most important part is on the inside. We do not want to get to a point where our singing is ever just ritual. We sing, blah, 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 and I hope it's a tune I like today. I just hope it's one of my favorites or whatever. Nothing wrong with having a favorite, but why? Is it really coming from our hearts, and what would that look like? What should that even, we could even get to the point where we'd say, what does that feel like to some degree? So it's with your hearts to God. So we're doing this as a ministry point to one another, admonishing one another, teaching one another with these types of songs, with our heart, ultimately directed at God. And then to sum it all up, verse 17, whatever you do, in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. That's again the very important qualifier again over everything that we do. And it does mean everything that you do. You do in the name of the Lord Jesus. There it is again, giving thanks. Just 3 times in the last few verses here. Giving thanks through him to God the Father. This gratefulness is a requirement. You ever thought it odd that someone would say, by the way, when it comes to thankfulness and gratefulness, that's not an option? A lot of times we think it is. Well, it's up to me if I want to be grateful or not. No, it's not. You and I are commanded to be grateful. But this is obviously not the only text. Remember those short little statements there in our study in 1 Thessalonians? And one of those, in everything give thanks, which is a command. We're always to be grateful, in everything giving thanks. In everything. All the time. We are to be the most grateful beings on this earth. And we're doing it not just because we feel it all welling up inside of us. Hopefully that comes with it. But even if it doesn't have a feeling of welling up inside of us, we're still grateful. Because we must be. So many people used to make that important distinction. Now remember, it doesn't say necessarily for everything give thanks, but in everything, which I think is fine, but I still think we come back around and say, no, it has to be for also. It has to be for it also, because we understand how these things are controlled. Now, this doesn't just break away into a new topic, and Paul says, well, now let's deal with family situations. This is still continuing the thought as those chosen of God, holy and elect. How are we supposed to behave ourselves? Well, we are supposed to be grateful. We are supposed to be those who teach and admonish one another with singing. And everything we do, in word or deed, we do all in the name of the Lord Jesus. All right, then how does that work its way out in the core unit of civilization? the core unit of our churches, which is our families, which is designed of God. It's His institution. It's not ours to fiddle with. We do not redefine the family. We certainly don't redefine marriage. It's His. Dan?
Before you go there, is it just me, or has anyone else noticed that kids have, on average, maybe it's just my kids, I don't know, have a hard time saying thank you?
Oh, no, I think it's universal.
And that has always kind of, since I noticed it, it's like, why would, I mean, I understand please. Please is like, I'm telling you that you can do it or not or whatever, but thank you is, I have something, why am I not happy? And I think, my opinion, just opinion, that we can't say thank you because of pride.
I agree.
Because we think we deserve the good thing. And I wonder here if this, in everything, give thanks. I mean, we always think of it from the, well, that's a bad thing. It's hard to give thanks for. But maybe it's also a don't be proud statement.
Right. I think so. Thank you was an odd thing to have to force on our children, and yet there it is. And sadly, it's still the same in society. I see it constantly, just generally out and about, and even at the workplace, where people aren't grateful. They're expectant. They expect certain things, especially when you get into management. I'm surprised people think once they get into some type of management of sorts, being the boss, being a director or whatever, they no longer have to be grateful. They have every right to expect things, which I suppose isn't a surprise with society, but we can never get to that point. We're always to be grateful, which means if I'm going to try to at least be somewhat sincere in my gratefulness, I'm going to actually have to give it some thought, aren't I? I'm going to have to think about it. Am I grateful, and why am I grateful? Why should I resist being someone who is just driven by expectation, which can be very bad at times. But along with this, what comes next in the family, which we're not going to get to today, but wives, be subject to your husbands. This is now the structure that God has given, and this is how it works its way out. So one of the reasons I think oftentimes in the situation with wives and their husbands and this whole being submissive and subject to your husbands is so resisted is its fundamental purpose is missed. It is because it is God's structure. It is God's order, and it's because of who we are that we fulfill our responsibilities, our roles, because He's the one that designed them. Not because they're all necessarily just perfectly set in order, as we would think they ought to be. Wives, be subject to your husbands as is fitting in the Lord. Another way we could say that, it is fitting in the Lord. That's why we do it. Husbands, love your wives, and do not be embittered against them. Interesting command for the husbands. Children, be obedient to your parents in all things, for this is well-pleasing to the Lord. That's why they do it. Not because their parents are always right or the parents are always the nicest people they've ever met or because they agree with their parents. No, you always obey your parents in the Lord because it's well-pleasing to the Lord. That's why you do it. It's one benefit of growing up in a Christian home is that children then are taught who the actual boss is. It really helps once in a while for children to realize, Mom and Dad have a boss too, and it's God. And they realize He's their boss. That's very important that be communicated, that it doesn't stop with us. Mom and Dad are having to do what they're doing because we are also accountable before the Lord. Fathers, do not, New American Standard Translation here, do not exasperate your children so that they will not lose heart. I kind of put it in a different way. Don't browbeat your children. Don't constantly be on them always, lest they lose their drive, their heart in these things. That's a big one, and it's directed at the fathers. You could say, well, the mothers are included too, which I would agree, but this is directed at the fathers, who oftentimes could just wipe out, as it were, practically speaking, the spirit of their children, rather than encouraging. You're always doing wrong. You never seem to be able to measure up. and are constantly on them. I understand there's stages where our children go through, they're always in trouble. But you've got to be careful with how that comes across and still trying to build them back up in their heart. Slaves, in all things obey those who are your masters on earth. And let's not think that that's not applicable. It's extremely applicable, especially when you understand the broad handling of the idea of slaves, not necessarily the narrow handling that we've had in my lifetime because of what went on in the 1800s and to some degree a little after that. Not with external service, as those who merely please men, but with sincerity of heart. There it is again, has to be from the heart, fearing the Lord. That's why you do it. Now, just in case, I think you all know where this is going to go. We won't be there today, but this certainly involves you and I at the workplace or in other positions that we have to answer to someone else. This is how we do it. We're doing it for the sake of the Lord, not but for the qualities of the people over us. I think to some degree this even fits with government officials. Knowing that from the Lord you will receive the reward of the inheritance. It is the Lord Christ whom you serve. Wow, that's about as clear as it can possibly be. In all of our service, we're actually serving Him. So if you've got a bad boss or someone over you that's just not a good supervisor or whatever, you and I must see past them to the one we're actually serving. Because it's so easy to say, well, I just have such a bad boss. I don't have to fulfill my responsibilities. That is common. That is so common. I've seen it, at least from my vantage point, increasing, where people are just giving up or not taking on any extra responsibility, not trying to do their best because their boss is unreasonable or their boss is insensitive or their boss is inattentive. I never get a compliment from our boss, we might say. Well, that's still not a reason, because we really don't serve our boss, we serve the Lord. Just like the wife is not really as much submitting to her husband as she is to the Lord, and that's why she submits to her husband. Children aren't necessarily just obeying their parents, they're doing it because it is to the Lord. Husbands aren't just loving their wives because they just love them, they're doing it because it's right before the Lord. It's their command. That's the primary motivation. That way, if we falter in any of these areas where something doesn't seem to be ideal, we still know what we have to do. There is certainly a call for you and I to stay consistent even when our heart is not engaged, which, if we're brutally honest, we'll have to admit that's quite often. There's oftentimes where I just don't feel as driven to do the best possible work. Well, I still have to do it. I don't feel so loving, and yet you still do it. There's nothing wrong with admitting that our heart isn't always engaged in everything. For he who does wrong will receive the consequences of the wrong which he has done, and that without partiality. Which is interesting, because a lot of people try to say, well, I think that's speaking to the masters here. No, it's actually speaking to the poor also, to the slaves. There's a couple verses or a few texts I'm going to bring up in this study where it points out to judges, when you're judging a matter, don't be partial to the poor. Why would they say that? And it's said multiple times. Because there is a tendency to do that. Well, they're the underdog. They have a cause. No, just because you're poor does not excuse you from responsibility. Just like just being rich, wealthy, or powerful doesn't excuse you from responsibility either. It covers both. Because you still have to deal with the matter regardless of who it is. If they do something wrong, it's wrong, and that's how you come at it. And then I think fitting with that, because I think the chapter break, in my opinion, should be at chapter 4, verse 2, but verse 1 of chapter 4, Masters, grant to your slaves justice and fairness. Why? Knowing that you too have a master in heaven. You have a boss in heaven, the ultimate boss, the ultimate master. That's why you do what you do. So don't lose track of that. Remember who the authority is. That's certainly throughout these verses. And then it has to be, we're working toward who and what we are. I want it to be genuine. It may not be at first, but that's where we're working toward, because it's commanded to be. In the notes, we had stopped just to begin point 2 toward the top of page 30, and we were down to point E as far as the notes are concerned. I want to pick up where we stop, point D, that it has to be, let the word of Christ be predominant, dwell in you, and act richly. I kind of picture overflowing. It's such a big part of our lives, it just spills over, which then fits really well with the singing. Hopefully that's part of our response. You're just singing, and the music and things like that come out of us because it's spilling over. And again, not necessarily because it's just an emotional thing. Sometimes it's in our thinking. You ever noticed, I don't think this is unique with me, that so often the tune in our head or whatever is because of some phrase that's come up in our study or whatever, or a reading or something like that. Just something it's said and it triggers a thought because it's based upon, the music is there to support the thought itself. It's supposed to be dwelling in us richly, the overflowing concept there that I just mentioned, off to the left there. None of this carries the idea of a casual relationship with the Word of Christ. It's not like, well, I'm acquainted with the Word of Christ. I certainly visit it once in a while, or certainly and every time we're at church or whatever. But no, this is like constantly. It's a regular part of our life. It is the predominant influence. Why? So other competing ideologies or other competing philosophies and popular trends of thought which we're surrounded with never have room to dominate or control. I grow weary of people thinking that they have a solid case against Christianity or churches or God or whatever because I'm just bored with it or it just doesn't meet a need. Do you realize how blasphemous that type of thinking is? And yet it is so common. So common. It just doesn't stir me like it used to. It just doesn't seem as interesting. It's not as engaging as it used to be. Again, this is where, and I understand I need this certainly once in a while, but it's where you wish someone could grab you and say, have you lost your mind? What makes you think you're the authority on this? What makes you think your judgment is the ultimate standard that you live by, that God's not living up to your whatever, your idea, your requirements? You don't have a clue what the requirements ought to be. So stop acting like it. That's just how I talk to myself. Sorry if it seems a bit harsh. Who do you think you are coming up with these requirements that he has to live up to? We should never entertain the thought, and certainly should never communicate the thought to someone else that somehow God has let me down. He's let me down. He just has. And who knows the various ways people come up with to state that, but that is evil to communicate such a thing. No, I may feel like, and practically speaking, it may look like God has let me down, but he certainly hasn't. Not in the slightest bit, not in any detail at all. And therefore, we remember that, so we understand that anytime I struggle with those things, I understand what's in need of correction. It's me. It's me that's in need of correction. That old chorus that used to be sung, I'm going to try not to sing it, but not my father, not my mother, not my sister, but it's me, O Lord, standing in the need of prayer. Does anyone know that one? Some of you might know it. Which is true. I'm the one that is in need. I'm the one in need of constant correction. This needs to constantly be happening. Therefore, I never trust those sinful instincts. As soon as I start to sense I'm disappointed with God, I'm frustrated with God, or things just aren't working out right, or whatever, I immediately have to dismiss them and take them captive, to the obedience of Christ, or so many of these things that fit together so well. So point E, and it should say, and in so doing, so richly overflowing this word of Christ, the word of God ultimately, it then spills over in other ways. And this is right in context here. The teaching and admonishing one another, this all dwelling with us in us richly, it should spill over into our singing because it's richly dwelling within us. Of course, it's going to be what our music is about. This is what our music's going to be about. And now Don's little quick jab here at the style, just because I have to do that once in a while. Hopefully the style or the presentation is supportive of clearly communicating the message. You ever hear some song, it's just so loud or so blasting or so whatever, that you're thinking, I don't understand the words of, oh, I love the tune. I don't say that, but I'm just saying that others do that. That they just say, just wow, that's a pick-me-up. That'll get people's foot tapping. Yeah, but do they understand what's being said? I'd far rather a dull tune than a lively tune, the dull tune having content and the lively tune no one understanding the content or the content being so shallow. There's just so much of that goes on, and I think there's more to it than just, well, there's particular tastes. I understand there's particular taste, and there are different styles out there, but if we understand the primary reason for why we're singing, then we'd better make sure that that's subservient to why we're singing. It needs to communicate the message clearly and not be too distracting either, because sometimes you can have such a tune that's just so whatever, way out there, that it distracts away from what we're singing about. It's like people come up with a fabulous tune, and now I need to throw in some words so that we can get this tune out there. That's wrong. That's backward. The message is predominant. The music is supposed to be supportive of not just the words, but the content itself, stressing it. It's very important that that be the case. I'm not going to sing it either, but Wednesday night after we dealt with the content we were in 2 Corinthians, Mike White sent me a YouTube clip of a song, Master, the Tempest is Raging. Some of us know that one. And it's one of those songs that even as a boy I remember thinking, that chorus especially fits really well. It builds, 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 builds. The master of ocean and earth and sky, get that point, it's just huge. It builds in honoring what that song was dealing with there. Even though I used to think, well, it's just about Jesus calming the waves. Yeah, but you ever thought about that? What was actually going on? Especially when you read the disciples' response afterwards. Who is this? They were terrified that even the winds and the waves, they do what he says. This is pretty impressive. So I think of a song like that and so many others that it just so well supports what's being discussed and the content that was there. People like Martin Luther and others realized the significance of these things, that if we incorporate core, deep theology into our singing, it'll stick. It'll help it stick. I don't want little chants or mantras or repetitious things over and over again going through our minds. And I know a lot of people say, yeah, but there's some songs out there that do that. Not really. Not really. It's amazing how many people will jump to that. Well, it doesn't say, the mercy of the Lord endureth forever. The mercy of the Lord endureth forever. Yeah, but there's a lot of other stuff in there. And I wouldn't use a text like that to then come up with our 3 or 4 word phrases that we repeat endlessly. And some of those are about as shallow as they can be versus the actual core content. I'm just trying to make a case for good, solid teaching and admonishing, both. It's instructive and it's challenging. And it's the word of Christ that's doing the challenging, not my testimony that's doing the challenging. Because there are a lot of testimonial songs out there. I know I'm really starting to limit sometimes the options that we have. But that's okay, because I'm understanding there's a requirement for the types of music that we have and why we do it. And it should be singable. I never want to come up with something that gets everybody to sing and it's not right. It's not in wisdom. It's not of Christ. Or it's just as shallow as it can be and there's no challenge at all in it, let alone no teaching. Oh, such as singing, this is the way it overflows. Singing is not just an expression of thought and feeling, but, at least based upon our type of singing, but is first to be formulated and governed with all wisdom. We cannot drop that phrase when we're dealing with our music. With all wisdom, which is God's wisdom, God's philosophy, all of that, God's details. That's what should dictate our songs. Not just some catchy phrase that's out there and people love the phrase and it seems like it's right and it seems like it's biblical, but it's not, or it's out of context or something like that. Even out of order sometimes can be an issue with a particular song. It must be right. I bolded and I underlined it there. It must be right. Well, I don't want to be too picky about some. So, Don, I don't like this where you're picking on some of these songs. Well, we better strive to be right in what we're singing. I do not want to sing something that's inaccurate. That's why we're critical. Well, you're just going to make it so critical, we're just never going to sing. I just love to hear the hymns. Yeah, but what about the hymns? Which hymns? Why? What is it in a hymn? Give me a hymn that you really like, and what is it in that hymn? Let's start to say, I just love the tradition of singing hymns. Well, so do I. I like the tradition of singing hymns as well. But why do we like that? What is it about them? Is it just we just sing to sing? Because there's no doubt there's a lot of people out there, I don't like this new stuff that people are coming up with. I just like the traditions. Yeah, but what about the traditions? What is the content there? What's the lack of the content there? That ought to be consuming our thinking as we're singing about it. It must be right, therefore grounded in the truth, and as wisdom also carries with it, it must be directing of the heart, the soul, and mind, not just in thought and feeling, but in practice. Because that's one huge part that's so often left out of our definition of wisdom. Wisdom is more than knowing. Wisdom is knowing. It's more than just comprehension or understanding, as we might put it. It is those things, but it is also then practice. It is not truly wisdom if it doesn't change us or impact us or direct us. It's not truly wisdom. We forget that. There's a lot of people, oh, that's a wise person. Like, he knows so much. Yeah, but does he live it? Does he practice it? Well, he knows so much. He knows so much he can tell everybody else what they don't know. He's got all the facts down. I'd never want to go up against this person in a debate. Yeah, but does he live it? Does he practice it? Is he submissive to it? There's a lot of folks that know a lot, and they can explain so many details, but they don't live it, then it's not wisdom. Because then you got to think, well, if you know it's true, but you don't live in light of it and you're not submissive to it, I don't think you actually believe it, so is it really that wise? It doesn't take much thought to scrutinize that. Mr. Eady, again, who's no lightweight when it comes to his commentaries, was dealing with this particular verse and made this point. I think it's so well stated. See if you can follow it here. When the gospel so possessed the heart as to fill it with a sense of blessing, then the lips might be tuned to song, which we would agree, absolutely. That's going to be a response if I'm going to sing about anything, and I think most of us, even if we don't have a good sense of music, want to sing, want to hum, maybe quietly. But of course we want to, because this is just great stuff to sing about. It ought to be what drives us. But then he said, experimental acquaintance. It's kind of just like, well, I get to know it, the theology, the wisdom of Scripture. Experimental acquaintance with Christianity could only warrant the chanting of the sacred ode, the ritual, the chants, or whatever. I'm probably going to step into dangerous territory here with some, but I never could get into those whole chant things. It's like something's missing, like a tune, supporting music, something like that. They took off for a while, and then it kind of just died off. Maybe I'm wrong on this, so I'm leaving some room there for that. Welcome to challenge there and see which one might teach and admonish a little bit better. But I think Mr. Eady was kind of onto that, and he was a long time on the scene before I was. That if you just come up with a casual acquaintance with Christianity, yeah, you can come up with the sacred ode, the chanting of the sacred ode, he put it there. That there's where you're at. I think a lot of people can do that responsive reading or whatever. I say this, you say that, and we're all kind of going back and forth. I remember as a boy, I used to think, now this is Don Sternport, I used to think, that's creepy. That's a little creepy. Where we would do that. Now, again, nothing wrong with that. I understand it can certainly serve a purpose, but if that's all that it is, I just don't know how certain things can be said so casually and with just a plain face that it's there. It's just like, it's just stirring to realize the depth of the concepts that we're dealing with, even to the most stoic type of personality. I think there's some concepts that are so wonderful, even the stoic personalities are overwhelmed. They might weep in private. Their throat might choke up, but they'll never let anybody know. That's okay. It's not like it needs to be expressed to other people, but certainly we're going to be stirred to the heart because it's in the heart. This is the way it ought to be. I understand there's a whole, what I fear is a facade out there where people can, there's just some people that are just so bubbly in their personalities and so emotional or whatever, they can just immediately get excited over a candy wrapper. But no, that's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something far more substantive. I probably shouldn't have used candy wrapper because I can imagine some of you thinking, well, yeah, I can get excited, especially if it's mine. Off to the left, the expected normal response with such an indwelling truth. And again, I can't stress this enough. This makes perfect sense. It just can't be just dull and easily contained within us when we understand what's going on. The expected normal response with such an indwelling truth is an overflowing expression and urge to share and express it openly. If I get a chance to do it, I want to do it. And it's, I may not be a good public speaker, but I can sing with one another. You kind of hear me singing, I kind of hear you singing, and then we hear a group singing, and then we all realize we're all on the same page, singing the same words, singing it in the same tune. There's a significance there that's more than we oftentimes think about. And it ought to be constantly in the forefront of our thinking. Music is a serious thing, serious concept, serious part of ministry. And it's not an add-on that we want to tickle the ears of people just to keep them interested because the tune's right. No, the content is so wonderful, and it's so clearly communicated. And if you get a good group of people that can sing and the instruments that are really well, and it just supports it holds it up beautifully, excellent. But it's more than just the presentation. It's the content, and we can't forget about the content because that's why we're singing. We forget about that, then why sing? Well, we just like to impress people. We got great music in our church. Really? Yes. We can compete with the best of the professionals out there. That was never our goal. Never our goal. Ever. For people before hearing certain things that were done at certain churches, I don't know why they let that person sing. They just couldn't care. Yeah, but did you know that person? Do you know why that person was singing? Do you know what was going on there? Again, I'm not speaking against quality. I like quality, but we never forget why the quality's there. Why I want it to be quality. I remember who I'm doing it for, but I remember what it's for. And it is for this purpose, teaching and admonishing one another in psalms, hymns, and spiritual songs, and so forth. So it's the overflowing expression and the urge to share it openly, half-hearted or passionless singing, or even half-hearted and passionless teaching should be the oddity. Again, I have to be so careful with this because I've had teachers before that just aren't the most dynamic. But I don't know. I think to some degree you can tell. If they're just kind of getting through the day, getting through the teaching session, just enduring it to get through the content. I understand there's plenty of other stuff that we do that with, but not this stuff. Not this. It's the oddity to think, how can we expect that such concepts being sung about or taught could be done with little to no passion at all? Now, it helps to get to know the person because some people, it's easy to tell they're passionate. I'm a rather wear my emotions and feelings externally. Others aren't quite the same. But you can tell when they're excited. You can tell when they're interested in something and passionate about it. I'm sorry to use a specific, I'm not really that sorry, I'm about to do it, but the example here between someone like Dan Carpenter and myself. I think most people, if they got to know us, would say, you guys are different in your personalities. And I don't think anyone's going to go, oh, really? Really? You hear Dan present, you hear me present, we're very different. But having known Dan now for a long time, I can tell when he's really excited about something, very impassioned about something. And Dan's one of those type of guys that just doesn't come up. I don't think you're good at small talk, Dan. Sorry to just say that, but he does it. But
I can do it, but I just prefer not to.
See, but my point is that when he comes to talk to you about it, it's because he's very interested in it. He's very excited about it. So my point is we've got to be careful how we measure this. So when I say passionless or whatever, it may not be the general idea or understanding, well, that's not as excited as the other person because your tone is just not there. No, it's you know the person and you know they're really impassioned about something, very interested in a certain concept. Then that's exactly where it ought to, which, again, if it's lacking that, that's the oddity. That's the odd thing. We don't think, well, most churches are so boring. And I think they're supposed to be, because if they're not boring, they're not reverential. Where do we get this type of concept? And yet I think it's all over the place, so people then oftentimes overreact, and then you're just a display of all kinds of antics on the stage. That's not right. That's not right. It's not a show. It's not a persona we put on. It's not some shtick that we kind of come up with so that people will be kind of interested in what's being talked about. It had better be genuine. There's going to be different types of styles or whatever, but nonetheless, it needs to be genuine, and we know who holds us accountable to it. Though passionless, boring, or whatever presentations of truly deep concepts may be common, we ought not expect it as the norm. Certainly not in ourselves. It's not the norm. Build on this concept, another quote here. Regarding the concept of wisdom here, Matthew Henry clarified this. He said, the proper office of wisdom is to apply what we know to ourselves for our own direction. That is certainly essential in true wisdom. The word of Christ must dwell in us, not in all notion and speculation to make us doctors. That's his point of saying it ought not dwell in us just to make us scholars in these things. It's obviously more than that. Instead, but in all wisdom, to make us good Christians. You really thought that that's the wisest ones? That you really know wisdom is at work in someone because they're not just smart Christians full of facts. They are good Christians. They actually live it. It's actually who they are. Make us good Christians and enable us to conduct ourselves in everything as becomes wisdom's children. That's well stated. Of course, that's what we would expect, because God is the source of all wisdom, and we are His children. Therefore, wisdom's children fits so well. That's what characterizes us. It is who and what we are. It's who and what we do. Dan?
A long time ago, when I first went to Genesee Christian School, we had an administrator who, whenever we prayed, and this was by conscious design, would always ask for wisdom, discernment, courage, and love. And her dad once said that, okay, keep in mind that Hayes was an engineer.
Oh, yes.
That if you've got, and this is going to sound odd to you folks, in a four-legged chair, one leg is redundant. It only takes three legs to be stable. So this four thing just kind of, he said that about the same time that got me thinking about this.
Yes.
So I looked up wisdom, and the definition, at least in English, of wisdom is not knowledge. It's the ability to discern
Yes.
the knowledge. What's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what's right, what's wrong. Wisdom is a knack for discernment.
Yes. Yeah, and it fits, and therefore I used to again be taught that wisdom then is not just knowledge, it's the application of it into our lives, that it's the actual living it out, and that's what's being stressed here as well. Off to the left, Ephesians chapter 1, just a little bit to the left in your Bible, Ephesians chapter 1, 16 to 19. Do not cease giving thanks for you while making mention of you, speaking of the Ephesians here. I pray that the eyes of your heart may be enlightened. This is what his core prayer was for the Ephesians. So, what? That you will know. That's often downplayed. Most people would say these days, sadly, because I think it's some type of artificial or emotional, experiential type thing. No, that you will know. Our emotions ought to be solidly tied to what we know. If the emotions aren't solidly tied to what we know, we might think something else is going on here. Maybe, I'm just doing one little area here, maybe it's manipulation. Maybe that's what's going on. Because you can manipulate all kinds of things just setting the scene right, and the knowledge be totally wrong or incoherent. Some people get excited just because other people are excited. Some people get, exuberant because the setting or the sounds or whatever are exuberant. But all of this with the focus that you might know what is the hope of his calling, what are the riches of his glory, of the inheritance in the saints, and what is the surpassing greatness of his power toward us who believe. These are huge words. These aren't casual words. Surpassing greatness, when's the last time we've ever used such a concept like that? Sincerely. That's probably not a concept that's true, but a superlative, something like that. It's the best of the best. Better than best. I don't know how you'd phrase it, but something like that. Surpassing greatness of his power toward us who believe. These are in accordance with the working of the strength of his might. This is just one example of this. Example of the handling of wisdom and then what it ultimately involves for us. Point H, it is with this all wisdom, again, I'm laying this out. Remember why we're laying this out? It's setting us up for what dictates then the singing. It's the word of Christ dwelling in us richly with all wisdom. It's not just rote memory of the word of Christ. Lots of people can pack their minds full of the word of Christ and quote it to you, but it is lacking the wisdom, the implementation in their lives, the actual core of their thinking. That's why we're here. While I'm dealing with it like this, it's with this all wisdom, not abridged. It's inclusive. It's not just my particular happy spots with wisdom. It's all wisdom, not abridged, that we are to teach and admonish each other. So it's not just my favorite concepts. Certain songs that I like to sing because they deal with a topic I really like. And then there comes other songs, and I'm not as interested in that. It's based in Scripture. I'm just not interested in it. It's too theological. It's too boring. It's too whatever. However, they drain themselves of the proper motivation there. This is what we're to teach and admonish each other with. So that's going to, I'm about to lay some responsibility on us. Some might say, Don, won't that involve me then having to really learn all this? I mean, I'm not against learning, but it sounds heavy. I didn't come here to learn deep stuff. I just want to have, encourage once in a while, make sure things are set in heaven, and, once in a while come up with something that disturbs my thinking, but that's about it. You're putting some responsibility on me. I'm going to have to learn all this stuff so that I can teach and admonish one another, and then singing is the venue that it's brought with. I have to understand what I'm singing. And then sing it so others can hear it as well, because I am teaching and admonishing with this. You're doing it to me. I'm doing it to you. We're doing it together. That's the song service? Absolutely. Okay, see, it's getting a little bit more involved, isn't it? This is not a surprise. I just added to the notes. Though the method or instrument Paul includes here is not typically expected. What am I saying? It's not a surprise. Most of us think teaching and admonishing one another with this word of Christ, it's all in wisdom. Well, of course, that's exactly what we're supposed to be. And then suddenly Paul says, in our singing. And we think, whoa, where did that come from? I mean, singing's nice, and we like to express ourselves once in a while, and it's good for those emotional people out there. But you're making this a responsibility, an involved responsibility that we're told to do this. Right? Yes, we're told to do this. This is our responsibility. Well, hopefully this isn't taking the joy out of us in our singing service. All right, I guess I'm going to have to sing. No, you get to sing. You get to sing, especially what we get to sing and know of its truth. This is not a surprise, though the method and instrument of Paul included here is not typically expected. Music, songs are not for entertainment in the church. Oh, please, let's remember that. We don't throw it in to make it interesting. They give some entertainment so they can endure the preaching and teaching. At least work them up a little bit so that they can endure the dull speaking. I fear some folks think that that's what it's for. No. The singing is a core part of our service. A core part, a very purposed part of our service. Not for entertainment in the church. Instead, the songs and the singing have a weightier purpose in teaching and challenging and exhorting each other, not entertaining. They have a core part in that. Some people say, let's hurry and get through this music service, or I want to get to the teaching. I think you missed something. We are doing the teaching. We are doing the admonishing. It's all a part of our music service. Dan?
So, you might remember a little kid song, faith is just believing what God said he will do. He will never fail you, his promises are true, so on and so on. It turns out that song, I don't know, let's see. So I'm going to be 67 pretty soon, and that would have been 60-ish years ago. I was singing that in a little children's church or Sunday school or whatever. And that is still one of the most important teaching times of my life. Faith is just believing that God would do what he said he would. It's not working myself up into believing he's going to do what he didn't say he would do.
Right.
And if he said he would do it, and I'm not believing it, that's not faith. So in my boys' Bible class, seniors, we sang that and a few other little kids' songs. And I get boys telling me, that song just keeps, or not that particular song, of the songs we sang, they just keep running through my mind.
That's kind of the point.
I was playing soccer the other day, and those songs were running through my mind.
Yes.
There's something about music, okay, you preach, you speak, people think about it then, it may dwell in their minds on and off for a little bit. But there's something about music that it just keeps coming back and coming back and coming back and
Yes.
telling you and telling you and telling you.
It is so much more effective. I am just about 100% sure nobody walks out of there thinking, that paragraph that Don just said in his sermon just keeps going through my mind. You're thinking, I couldn't quote it, but I think I got the gist of it. That's about the best any of us could do after any one of these sermons. Probably about the best, unless I really flubbed up, and then it's funny how people really remember the details with that. But with a song, it's interesting how it does just that. I think we can all start to deduce this makes a lot of sense. Even practically, it makes a lot of sense. It sticks in my head, and good concepts are what I want to stick in my head, not these ridiculous commercial jingles that are out there that are just annoying. There are some that come up on the radio. Sometimes I get angry every time they come up, not because the concept's wrong. I'm not going to say which one in particular, but I get furious every time because it sticks in my head, and I've almost swerved off the road trying to make sure I change the channel or something because I don't want it to stick in my head. It's not what I want going through my head all day. I want it to be something of value, something useful. Some of the songs we sing on Sunday just stick in my head all week, and I'm not trying to think about them. Isn't that interesting? Some of us think, I just can't learn anything, and yet we can't get certain tunes and words and whatever out of our heads because they're just there. So I think we can see how well it works. 60 years ago, Dan, that's a long time. And there it is, it's still there. Still there. These things will be with us for eternity. So it's not a surprise, at least in this sense, for us. Music and songs are not for entertainment in the church, but have a weightier purpose in teaching and challenging and exhorting each other. That's all included in those words there. So the music, the psalms, the hymns, the spiritual songs, people love to just break this down and say, well, what style is that? And what are we talking about here? These are all pretty much traditional ways of coming at it with a little bit different emphasis, but they all have the same core concept. Because you could go up to Matt and say, Matt, are we singing hymns today or spiritual songs? It doesn't matter. As long as in the general category of these, and he's throwing all the different ones in there, Psalms, I think, are in direct reference to the actual Psalms. But they are to be soundly under the jurisdiction of all wisdom to best fit the purpose of teaching, instructing, and admonishing. That's what we're looking for. Does it do it? Does it fit it? That's what I'm singing. And I want to keep my mind engaged, not like I let my mind, isn't interesting how I can multitask when I sing. I can be thinking about all other things, and just out of my mouth are coming these words. That's not right. We'd better be engaged when we sing as far as our brain is fully aware of what we're doing. Pay attention to what we're singing. If the Lord said, we will give an account of every idle word that we speak there in Matthew chapter 12, I think this firmly fits in that category. Idle word? Yeah, we're saying it, but we're not really engaged in it. We're not thinking about it. This certainly fits. Then, off to the left, the songs are to be in response to, in obedience to, the word of Christ, and are to lend to its enriching in each other. Why stress that? The word of Christ is to dwell in us richly, and one of the ways that we encourage one another for this word to spill over constantly in us, dwelling in us richly, is music. Because it does work. I wish it was as good when it comes to preaching, but it just isn't. Preaching just doesn't stick like music does. That's why we're very careful. I would strongly stress what music we fill our minds with. What music we fill our minds with. I don't want something that's distracting. It's amazing how our society is obsessed, even in my lifetime. I'm not sure it was always that way. I don't think way back in the 1800s where they had, orchestras and all these other things that people were quite as obsessed about it. Maybe they were. I just heard somewhere recently that Franz Liszt was apparently a super music star in his day. That would probably surprise people today. But in our lifetime, we have seen it, and probably before I was born, but it has just become now just the top of the top of the top. And everyone, it's all about the music. It's all about the star and whatever. I just love their music or whatever. Yeah, but what are they singing? What are they saying? What are they communicating? It will stick in our heads, so be very careful. Little ears, what you hear and what you're letting get into the ear gate and therefore sinking into our thinking. It's a serious, serious thing. Point J, the emphasis is not on the types of songs here, though types such as spiritual songs can be broad. It can be quite broad in its scope. When the purpose presented in our text is overlooked, or the purpose in this text is overruled for some temporal values reason, or it's just forgotten. I just like to sing because it's just me. I'm just a music kind of person. You can give me a spiritual song or whatever, and you can give me an old folk tune out there, and I'm just thrilled with it. I just love to sing. No, not you and I. Hopefully we love to sing. That's fine, but the content of it, there are just some things I don't want to sing. As I've stressed often before, there's things I would be embarrassed to sing. I don't know if I've used this before. I probably have, but I can remember for some reason so vividly in 3rd and 4th grade, I hated music class. I hated it. And not because the teacher was just putting forth satanic music. No, they were all little cutesy songs and all these other. The Farmer in the Dell was one of my least favorites for a couple reasons. I won't do on the other. But one of it, in my little kid brain, I thought, this is just stupid. This is just stupid to sing this. And don't get me wrong, it may sound hypercritical. If Farmer in the Dell is one of your all-time favorite songs, okay, but I just think the reason I was thinking that as a kid, because I was used to singing the hymns, and we never sang a hymn in music class. We never sang them. We sang these other songs that were just okay, a little bit of a song, and some of them to this day I still remember, and they still stick in my head, and I'm thinking, yeah, but it just doesn't fit. The closest I ever remember even thinking that we were even swerving into some peripheral version of something religious was Christmas is coming, and the goose is getting fat, Remember that song, Please Put a Penny in an Old Man's Hat? I remember that from those, And then it was fine if you don't have a hey penny, then God bless you. I had no idea what a hey penny was, but I just remember saying, well, at least they're saying something about God in the song. And you're just thinking, well, music's a part of our culture and everything it is, but not for us. It is so much more significant. It is a part of our responsibility. And I don't want to waste the resources on something that is far less significant out there. We are dealing with music, generally speaking, that has words associated with it. So when the purpose is all forgotten, though, that this is the case, or overruled, or whatever, they are not fulfilling their purpose and may become, especially in our churches, a distraction from purpose or just tradition. And I think just tradition is wrong. It's not in keeping with obedience. Hopefully it is tradition. Hopefully it is something we do. But it must never be just tradition. We sing because we sing. These are what we've always sung. Okay, but why do we sing it? What should we? Is there anything else that we could be singing? I mean, Matt is so much more daring than I ever would be in coming up and making us all learn new songs. And that's a good thing. We want to learn these things and stretch ourselves, especially when the content is so deep, so significant. This is a good thing. Point K. Notice also these references to music and songs are more for the purpose of communicating spiritual concepts and communicating instruction to each other rather than what most people, I think, are looking for in their music, rather than a religious experience of worship. We are not looking for a religious experience of worship. That's not what we're after. Well, that never worked out. I didn't feel inspired at all. That music was so dull. No. I don't doubt a religious experience can happen, but that's not our goal. Our goal is the teaching and admonishing one another in these things, and this is its core content. Let's make it stick. Let's hope the tune is good enough to help me think about it and dwell upon it and meditate upon it all through the week. Because I guarantee most of us walk out of this church service thinking more, as far as details are concerned, about the words and the tunes that we sang on a Sunday than you do my sermons. That's just a fact. So that carries a great deal with it. Now, hopefully the sermons lend to the all-wisdom part of our singing, so we'll think, well, we're not going to sing that word or that phrase in a song. Sometimes we've gone through on our hymnals and we've crossed out certain words and we've replaced them because we've started to realize that's not in keeping with what it actually means. I appreciate that with our young people in their singing. Sometimes they will change the words of the song because they think that's not right. But the rest of it seems to be, how'd they get that one phrase wrong? That's okay. We're not going to throw the whole thing away. We'll salvage it and hopefully put something of greater significance there. Off to the left, there was much worship in the Psalms, because that's what's included here. But Paul, drawing out much more of their overall use, much like we see Psalms in sermons today. It's interesting, we do still have the Psalms, but we do not have the tunes. The tunes didn't come with them. Again, just a reminder that the tune, no doubt, was significant or whatever, but the content was the most important, and we can preach through Psalms. Just like we should theoretically be able to preach, as it were, hymns and songs and things like that, and of course tie them quickly to the texts from which they come or are supposed to have come. So like we see in the Psalms and sermons, drawing out or teaching and admonishing one another in the content of those things. Point L, the spirit of the singing is under a particular qualifier. Boy, all these qualifications, all these restrictions. Yeah, that's true. Here it is. Hen, te, chariti. Comes from charis, grace, which means with the grace. With the grace. Verse 16 again, let the word of Christ richly dwell within you with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness, it says here. I'm not a huge fan of that particular translation because the underlying word is the core word for grace, with the grace, the proper article narrowing it down to the grace of God, His favor of us, this undeserved by us, and this dictating our singing always. Singing with the grace is probably as close as we can to the underlying idea there. Singing with the grace always in our hearts to the Lord. Half-hearted, unfocused, ungrateful singing is more than just hypocritical. We're singing inspired by the grace, but singing not focused, half-hearted, ungrateful is more than hypocritical. Here we go. Ready? It is disobedient. Uh-oh. It is disobedient. This is where a lot of people would get uncomfortable. Not you all, I know, but some would say, I'm getting really uncomfortable with that. So if I'm singing unfocused or half-hearted, again, I don't have to pretend that's there, but I'm really focused on what we're singing about. If I don't do that, then I am disobedient? See, I'll just put the little question tone there, and it makes it sound like I'm supposed to say, well, maybe not. No, we're disobedient. This is a command here. We forget I love that text. It just seems to add something to our music services. And some days I just don't sing because I don't feel genuine. Again, that whole point of I don't want to be hypocritical, people use as license for all kinds of wrong. No, and you may not feel like it or whatever, but you're going to sing and you're going to work at it. I ought to be, at the very least, as we're singing, and I ought to be full-hearted in what I'm singing. Not foolhardy, but full-hearted in what I'm singing. It is disobedient, and it is ungrateful, and I would even say it is irreverent. Can we picture ourselves singing before the throne of God? We've died, and now we're before the throne of God, and we're singing just to sing, and we're not, and you think, well, no, I would never do that there. We are singing before the throne of God. I may not be there in person right now, but I am before the throne of God. Therefore, I ought to be doing it all the time. All right, Don, well, how about when I'm in my car? Yeah, when we're in our car. When we're by ourselves. Now, that's not doing the teaching and admonishing one another, but it still ought to be genuine. Off to the left. This is often translated with thankfulness, as it is here in the New American Standard, which is certainly included. But the way it is worded seems to demand even more than just what we would think with gratefulness. It is to be with the grace. Because it's not just gratefulness, it's with us understanding, I get to sing this. I get to. Other people might sing, the Amazing Grace is sung constantly by a lot of folks who ought not sing it. They are clueless to what they're singing. Totally clueless to what they're singing about. And probably a lot of the Christmas carols and things like that, they are clueless about these things. That ought not be something that we look on in a positive way. I think I can finish this up here. Point K, finally, it is also to be in your hearts. That's that one again. It gets us, doesn't it? I've got to work at being sincere, and if I'm not sincere, I admit it and still work at it. I'm going to have to meditate and dwell on these things. Music can usually help us with that. It is to be from within, genuine, and again, not hypocritical, since it is always to be to God. It is singing to God, hearing one another, that's the teaching and admonishing, but it is to God, for God, though with conscious and purposed hearing of those around us, teaching and admonishing, some singing it to God, understanding I'm doing it out loud so you can be taught and admonished, and I can be taught and admonished, and we'll all realize why we're doing it. None of us is singing to each other as much as we are singing for each other to God. To try to work in some of our prepositions there. And then we'll pick up next week with point number 3. Again, not an easy one to just look on casually. All that you do All that we do is in the name of the Lord Jesus. And while we're doing it, in the name of the Lord Jesus, we are grateful. We are giving thanks. Giving thanks is extremely on purpose. It is absolutely to always be on purpose. And I think most of us realize this. I don't think it's even possible for anyone to be too grateful. You ever met someone who's too grateful? You might think maybe they're bothering you because they won't stop saying thank you, but there's no way we're ever going to be too grateful when it comes to what God has done for us. So think about this when we get to our singing part, the music part of our services. Sense a little extra weight of responsibility on us, but understanding why we're doing this. Let's pray. Father, thank you. Thank you for such clarity, and not just clarity in our responsibility, but the purpose behind it. That we would be those sensing that responsibility, always being aware that we get to sing what we sing, that it is the highest of privileges for us to be able to utter such things to you, and yet for the sake, to some degree, of each other, as a group especially. Please, Father, let us be reverent in the responsibility that you've given in all of these areas. It's in Jesus' name we ask it. Amen.